Chapter 6. Stormy Years in France. In Monsieur Defarge's wine shop in Saint-Antoine, customers came and went all the time. They came to drink the thin, rough wine, but more often they came to listen and to talk and to wait for news. One day there were more customers than usual. Defarge had been away for 3 days, and when he returned that morning, he brought a stranger with him, a man who repaired roads.
"Madam,"
Defarge said to his wife,
"this man, who is called Jacques, has walked a long way with me."
One customer got up and went out.
"This mender of roads," continued Defarge, "who is called Jacques, is a good man. Give him something to drink."
A second man got up and went out. The man who repaired roads sat down and drank. A third man got up and went out.
"Have you finished, my friend?" said Defarge. "Then come and see the room I promised you."
They went upstairs to the room where Dr. Manette had sat making shoes. The 3 men who had left the wine shop were waiting. Defarge spoke to them.
"No names. You are Jacques 1, Jacques 2, and Jacques 3. I am Jacques 4. This is Jacques 5. He brings us news of our poor friend Gaspard, whose child was killed by the Marquis's coach a year ago."
"I first saw Gaspard," said Jacques 5, "holding on under the Marquis's coach as it drove into our village. He ran away. But that night the Marquis was murdered. Gaspard disappeared, and was only caught a few weeks ago. The soldiers brought him into the village and hanged him. And they have left his body hanging in the village square, where the women go to fetch water, and our children play." When Jacques 5 had left them, Jacques 1 said to his friends, "What do you say? Shall we put their names on the list?"
"Yes, all of them. The castle and all of the family of Evrémonde."
"Is the list safe?" asked Jacques 2.
"Yes, my friend," said Defarge. "My wife remembers everything. But more than that, every name is carefully knitted into her work. Nothing can be forgotten."
A few days later, Defarge reported to his wife some news from his friend, Jacques, in the police.
"A new spy has been sent to Saint-Antoine. His name is Barsad, John Barsad. He's English."
"What does he look like? Do we know?"
"He's about 40 years old, quite tall, black hair, thin face," said Defarge.
"Good," said his wife. "I'll put him on the list tomorrow. But you seem tired tonight, and sad."
"Well," said Defarge, "it is a long time." "It takes time to prepare for change. The crimes against the people of France cannot be revenged in a day. but we may not live to see the end."
"Even if that happens," replied Madame Defarge, "we shall help it to come. But I believe that we shall see the day of our revenge against these hated noblemen." The next day, a stranger came into the wine-shop. At once, Madame Defarge picked up a rose from the table and put it in her hair. As soon as they saw this, the customers stopped talking, and one by one, without hurrying, left the wine-shop. "Good day, madame," said the stranger. "Good day, monsieur," said Madame Defarge. But to herself she said, "About 40 years old, tall, black hair, thin face. Yes, I know who you are, Mr. John Barsad." "Is business good?" asked the stranger. "Business is bad. The people are so poor." Madame Defarge looked over to the door. "Ah, here is my husband." "Good day, Jacques," said the spy.
"You're wrong,"
said Defarge, staring at him.
"That's not my name. I am Ernest Defarge."
"It's all the same," said the spy easily. "I remember something about you, Monsieur Defarge. You took care of Dr. Manette when he came out of the Bastille."
"That's true,"
said Defarge. "Have you heard much from Dr. Manette and his daughter? They're in England now."
"No, not for a long time."
"She was married recently. Not to an Englishman, but to a Frenchman. It's quite interesting when you remember poor Gaspard. Miss Manette has married the nephew of the Marquis that Gaspard killed. Her new husband is really the new Marquis, but he prefers to live unknown in England. He's not a Marquis there, just Mr. Charles Darnay." Monsieur Defarge was not happy at this news. When the spy had gone, he said to his wife,
"Can it be true? If it is, I hope that Miss Manette keeps her husband away from France."
"Who knows what will happen?" replied Madame Defarge. "I only know that the name of Evrémonde is in my list, and for good reason." She went on calmly knitting, adding name after name to her list of the enemies of the people. Time passed, and Madame Defarge still knitted. The women of Saint-Antoine also knitted, and the thin, hungry faces of Jacques and his brothers became darker and angrier. The noise of the coming storm in Paris was growing louder. It began one summer day in the streets of Saint-Antoine, around Defarge's wine-shop, with a great crowd of people. A crowd who carried guns, knives, sticks, even stones, anything that could be a weapon. An angry crowd who shouted and screamed, who were ready to fight and to die in battle.
"Friends and citizens," shouted Defarge, "we are ready! To the Bastille!"
The crowd began to move, like the waves of the sea.
"Follow me, women!" cried Madame Defarge. A long, sharp knife shone brightly in her hand. "We can kill as well as any man." The living sea of angry people ran through Saint-Antoine to the Bastille, and soon the hated prison was ringing with the noise of battle. Fire and smoke climbed up the high stone walls, and the thunder of the guns echoed through the city. 4 terrible and violent hours. Then a white flag appeared above the walls, and the gates were opened. The Bastille had been taken by the people of Paris. Soon the crowds were inside the building itself, and shouting, "Free the prisoners!" But Defarge put his strong hand on the shoulder of one of the soldiers. "Show me the North Tower. Take me to 105 North Tower. Quickly!" "Follow me," said the frightened man. And Defarge and Jacques III went with him through the dark prison, past heavy closed doors, up stone stairs, until they came to a low door. It was a small room, with dark stone walls, and only one very small window, too high for anyone to look out. Defarge looked carefully along the walls. "There! Look there, Jacques III!" he cried. "A.M.," whispered Jacques. "A.M. Alexandre Manette," said Defarge softly. "Let us go now." But before they left, they searched the room and the furniture very carefully, looking for small hiding places. Then they returned to the crowds below. The Bastille and its officers were now in the hands of the people, and the people wanted revenge and blood. "At last it has begun, my dear," said Defarge to his wife. It was the 14th of July, 1789. In the village where the Marquis had lived, and where Gaspard had died, life was hard. Everything was old and tired and broken down. The people, the land, the houses, the animals. In the past, everything and everybody had had to work for the Marquis, and he had given nothing in return. But now, strangers were travelling about the country. Strangers who were poor like the people, but who talked about new ideas, ideas which had started in Paris, and were now running like fire across the country. The road-mender, who had brought the news of Gaspard to Paris, still worked repairing the roads. One day, a stranger came to him as he worked on the road outside the village. "Jacques?" said the stranger. He shook the road-mender's hand, and turned to look at the Marquis's castle on the hill. "It's tonight, Jacques," he went on quietly. "The others will meet me here." It was very dark that night, and the wind was strong. No one saw the 4 men who came quietly to the castle and said nothing. But soon the castle itself could be seen in the dark sky. The windows became bright. Smoke and yellow flames climbed into the sky. Monsieur Gabelle called loudly for help, but the people in the village watched, and did nothing to save the castle, where the Marquis had lived. Chapter 7.
A call for help. The troubles in France continued. The citizens of France had fought to win power, and now they used it. Castles were burned, laws were changed, and the rich and powerful nobles died, their heads cut off by that terrible new machine of death, the guillotine. In Paris, the king was put in prison, and in 1792 the people of France sent him to the guillotine as well. The French Revolution was now 3 years old, but there were more years of terror to come. Not all the rich nobles had died. Some had escaped to England. Some had even sent or brought their money to London before the Revolution began. And Tellson's Bank, which the French emigrants used, had become a meeting place, where they could hear and talk about the latest news from France. One wet August day, Mr. Lorry sat at his desk in the bank, talking to Charles Darnay. The years since Charles's marriage had seen the arrival of a daughter, little Lucy, who was now 9 years old. Dr. Manette had continued in good health, and at the centre of that warm family circle was always Lucy, a loving daughter, wife, mother, and a kind-hearted friend. Even Sidney Carton, though his old bad ways were unchanged, was a family friend, and very much a favourite with little Lucy. But at this moment Charles Darnay was trying very hard to persuade his old friend, Mr. Lorry, not to go to France. "It's too dangerous. The weather is not good. The roads are bad. Think of your age," he said. "My dear Charles," said the banker, "you think that, at nearly 80 years of age, I'm too old? But that's exactly why I must go. I have the experience. I know the business. My work is to find and hide papers that might be dangerous to our customers. And anyway, Jerry Cruncher goes with me. He'll take good care of my old bones." "I wish I could go," said Charles restlessly. "I feel sorry for the people in France, and perhaps I could help them. Only last night, when I was talking to Lucy—" "Talking to Lucy," repeated Mr. Lorry. "You talk about your lovely wife at the same time as you talk about going to France? You must not go. Your life is here, with your family." "Well, I'm not going to France, but you are, and I'm worried about you." Just at that moment, a bank clerk put an old, unopened letter on Mr. Lorry's desk, and Darnay happened to see the name on it. The Marquis of Evrémonde, at Tellson's Bank, London. Since his uncle's death, this was Darnay's real name. On the morning of his wedding to Lucy, he had told Dr. Manette, but the doctor had made him promise to keep his name secret. Not even Lucy or Mr. Lorry knew. "We can't find this Marquis," said the clerk. "I know where to find him," said Darnay. "Shall I take the letter?" "That would be very kind," said Mr. Lorry. As soon as he had left the bank, Darnay opened the letter. It was from Monsieur Gabelle, who had been arrested and taken to Paris. "Monsieur wants the Marquis. I am in prison, and I may lose my life, because I worked for a landowner who has left France. You told me to work for the people, and not against them, and I have done this. But no one believes me. They say only that I worked for an emigrant, and where is that emigrant? Oh, monsieur, please help me, I beg you." This cry for help made Darnay very unhappy. After the death of the Marquis, he had told Gabelle to do his best for the people. But now Gabelle was in prison, just because he was employed by a nobleman. It was clear to Darnay that he must go to Paris. He did not think that he would be in danger, as he had done everything he could to help the people of his village. He hoped that he would be able to save his old servant. That night, Charles Darnay sat up late, writing 2 letters. One was to his wife, Lucy. The other was to her father, Dr. Manette. He told them where he had gone and why, and he promised that he would write to them from France. He had left secretly, he wrote, to save them from worrying. The next day he went out, without saying anything to them of his plans. He kissed his wife and his daughter, and said that he would be back soon. And then he began his journey to Paris. When he arrived in France, Darnay found that he could travel only very, very slowly towards Paris. The roads were bad, and every town, every village, had its citizens with guns who stopped all travellers, asked them questions, looked at their papers, made them wait, or threw them in prison, turned them back, or sent them on their way. And it was all done in the name of freedom, the new freedom of France. Darnay soon realized that he could not turn back until he had reached Paris and proved himself to be a good citizen, not an enemy of the people. On his 3rd night in France, he was woken by an official and 3 other men with guns. "Emigrant," said the official, "these 3 soldiers will take you to Paris, and you must pay them." Darnay could only obey, and at 3 o'clock in the morning he left with 3 soldiers to guard him. Even with them he was sometimes in danger. The people in the towns and villages all seemed to be very angry with emigrants. But finally they arrived safely at the gates of Paris. Darnay had to wait a long time, while officials carefully read his papers, which explained the reasons for his journey. One official, seeing Gabelle's letter, looked up at Darnay in great surprise, but said nothing. Another official asked roughly, "Are you Evrémonde?" "Yes," replied Darnay. "You will go to the prison of La Force." "But why?" asked Darnay. "Under what law?" "We have new laws, Evrémonde," said the official sharply, "and emigrants have no rights. You will be held in secret. Take him away." As Darnay left, the first official said quietly to him, "Are you the man who married the daughter of Dr. Manette?" "Yes," replied Darnay in surprise. "My name is Defarge, and I have a wine shop in Saint-Antoine. Perhaps you have heard of me." "Yes. My wife came to your house to find her father." "Why did you come back to France? It will be very bad for you." Darnay was taken to the prison of La Force, and put in a cold, empty room with a locked door, and bars across the windows. He thought of Dr. Manette, and his many years alone forgotten in the Bastille. Now I, too, have been buried alive, he thought. Chapter 8. In the Hands of the Citizens. Tellson's bank in Paris was in a large building south of the river, close to the heart of the city. Mr. Lorry had arrived in Paris some days before Charles Darnay, and was now living in some rooms above the bank. One evening, looking out of the window, he saw that a large grindstone had been brought into the square below. There was a wild, shouting crowd around it, busy sharpening their knives and swords and axes, which were already red with blood. With shaking hands, Mr. Lorry closed the window. He had decided to go downstairs and talk to the bank guards, when suddenly the door of his room opened, and Lucy and her father ran in. "Lucy! Manette! What has happened? Why are you here?" cried Mr. Lorry. "Charles is in Paris," cried Lucy. "He came to help an old family servant, but he's been taken to prison." At that moment, the shouts of the crowd outside grew louder. "What is that noise?" asked the doctor. "Don't look out!" cried Mr. Lorry. "My friend," said the doctor, "I am safe in Paris. I was a prisoner in the Bastille. Everybody knows about me and how I suffered. Already people want to help me. They gave us news of Charles. Even so, don't look outside. Where is Charles?" "In the prison of La Force." "La Force? Dear Lucy, you can do nothing tonight. You must go to one of the rooms here and wait. I must talk with your father at once." Lucy kissed him and left the room. "Quick, Manette," said Mr. Lorry. "These people outside, with their bloody knives, are murdering the prisoners. If you are so well known, if you have this power, talk to them. Tell them who you are, and go to La Force. Quick, before it is too late." Dr. Manette hurried outside. Mr. Lorry watched from the window as the doctor talked to the crowd. He heard shouts of, "Long live the Bastille prisoner! Help his friend in La Force!" Mr. Lorry went to Lucy and found her with her daughter and Miss Pross. Together they waited all night for news, but none came. In the morning, Mr. Lorry found rooms for Lucy and her family in a quiet street near the bank. He left Jerry Cruncher with them as a guard, and returned worriedly to Tellson's. At the end of the day, a strong, serious man came to see him. "My name is Defarge. I come from Dr. Manette. He gave me this." Defarge gave him a piece of paper. The doctor had written, "Charles is safe, but I cannot leave this place yet. Take Defarge to Lucy." "Come with me," said Mr. Lorry happily. They went downstairs, and at the front door found Madame Defarge knitting. Without a word, she joined them, and Mr. Lorry led them to Lucy's rooms. There, Defarge gave Lucy a note from her husband. "Dearest, be brave. I am well, and your father has some power here. You cannot answer this, but kiss our child for me." Only a short letter, but it meant so much to Lucy. Gratefully, she kissed the hands of Defarge and his wife. Madame Defarge said nothing. Her hand was cold and heavy, and Lucy felt frightened of her. Miss Pross came in with little Lucy. "Is that his child?" asked Madame Defarge, stopping her knitting to stare. "Yes, madame," said Mr. Lorry. "That is our poor prisoner's little daughter." "It is enough, my husband," said Madame Defarge. "We can go now." Her voice was as cold as her hand. "You will be good to my husband?" asked Lucy, afraid. "I beg you, as a wife and mother?" "We have known many wives and mothers," said Madame Defarge, "and we have seen many husbands and fathers put in prison for many years. What is one more among so many?" As the Defarges left, Lucy turned to Mr. Lorry. "I am more afraid of her than of any other person in Paris," she whispered. Mr. Lorry held her hands. He did not say anything, but he was also very worried. The doctor did not come back from La Force for several days. During that time, 1,100 prisoners were killed by the people. Inside the prison, Dr. Manette had come before a tribunal, which was a group of judges appointed by the people. These judges made their own laws and threw prisoners out into the streets to be murdered by the crowds. Dr. Manette told the tribunal that he had been a prisoner in the Bastille for 18 years, and that his son-in-law was now a prisoner in La Force. The tribunal had agreed to keep Charles Darnay safe from the murdering crowds, but they would not let him leave the prison. Dr. Manette seemed to become stronger as he lived through these terrible days, doing everything he could to save his daughter's husband. He was able to see Darnay regularly, but noblemen and emigrants were hated by the citizens of New France, and the doctor could not set Darnay free. The guillotine, that new machine of death, cut off the heads of many, many people, the powerful and the cruel, but also the beautiful, the innocent, and the good. Each day, Lucy did not know if her husband would live or die. She lived every moment in great fear, but her father was sure that he could save his son-in-law. 1 year and 3 months passed, and Darnay was still in prison. Dr. Manette now had an official job as doctor to 3 prisons, and was able to visit Darnay regularly. He became more and more loved by the rough people of the Revolution. But the guillotine
continued to kill. "Try not to worry," he told Lucy. "Nothing can happen to Charles. I know that I can save him." But Lucy could not see him or visit him. She could not even write to him. On the day when Charles Darnay was at last called for his trial, Lucy and Dr. Manette hurried to Tellson's Bank to tell Mr. Lorry. As they arrived, a man got up and disappeared into another room. They did not see who it was, but in fact it was Sidney Carton, just arrived from London. There were 5 judges in the tribunal, and the trials were short and simple. The voices of truth, honesty, and calm reason were never heard at these trials, and most of the prisoners were sent to the guillotine, which pleased the noisy crowds. 15 prisoners were called before Darnay that day, and in no more than an hour and a half, all of them had been condemned to death. "Charles Evrémonde, who is called Darnay." As Darnay walked in front of the judges, he tried to remember the careful advice that Dr. Manette had given him. "Charles Evrémonde, you are an emigrant. All emigrants must die. That is the new law of France." "Kill him!" shouted the people. "Cut off his head! He's an enemy of the people!" The president of the judges asked Darnay, "Is it true that you lived many years in England?" "Yes, that is true," replied Darnay. "So you are an emigrant, surely?" "No, not in the meaning of the law," replied Darnay. "I earn my own living in England. I have never wanted or used the name of Marquis, and I did not want to live by the work of the poor people of France. So I went to live and work in England, long before the Revolution." "And did you marry in England?" "Yes. I married a Frenchwoman, the daughter of Dr. Manette, a prisoner of the Bastille, and a well-known friend of all good citizens." These words had a happy effect on the crowd. Those who had shouted for his death now shouted for his life. Then Monsieur Gabelle and Dr. Manette spoke for Charles Darnay. The doctor spoke well and clearly, and was very popular with the crowd. When he had finished, the judges decided that the prisoner should be set free, and the crowd shouted their agreement loudly. Soon they were carrying Darnay in a chair through the streets of Paris to Dr. Manette's house. Lucy was waiting there, and when she ran out and fell into the arms of her husband, the men and women in the crowd kissed one another and danced for happiness. Darnay and Lucy were together again, safe and happy. "I told you that I would save him," said Lucy's father proudly. "Well, I have saved him. And you must not worry now." But Lucy was still worried. So many innocent men and women had died for no reason, and every day brought more deaths. A shadow of fear and hate lay over France, and no one knew what dangers the next day would bring. It was not possible to leave Paris at once, as Charles did not have the necessary papers. They must live quietly, and hope to leave as soon as they could. But that night, when Dr. Manette, Charles, and Lucy were sitting together, they heard a loud knock at the door.
"What can this be?" said Lucy, trembling. "Hide Charles! Save him!"
"My child," said the doctor,
"I have saved him. He is a free man."
But when he opened the door, 4 rough men pushed their way into the room. "The citizen Evremond, where is he? He is again the prisoner of the people." "I am here," said Darnay. "But why am I again a prisoner?" "You are accused by citizens of Saint-Antoine." Dr. Manette had said nothing. He seemed to be made of stone. But suddenly he spoke. "Will you tell me who has accused my son-in-law?" "I shouldn't tell you this," said one of the men. "But Citizen Evremond, called Darnay, is accused by Monsieur and Madame Defarge, and by one other person." "What other?" "You will hear that tomorrow," replied the man.